Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Darsh Shah.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja.
And welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare.
Our guest today is Dr. Joseph Antoun. Dr. Antoun is the CEO and chairman of the Board of L-Nutra, a unique Nutri-tech company leading the food as medicine movement by applying cutting-edge science to nutrition research. Dr. Antoun completed his health policy studies at Harvard University, public health at Johns Hopkins University, medicine and biological sciences at St. Joseph's University, and his PhD studies in Mediterranean and Middle Eastern studies at King's College. Prior to his current role, he served as the chairman of the board at the Global Healthspan Policy Institute and as a member of Forbes Business Development Council. He was also the CEO of Health Systems Reform, a consultancy aimed at elevating public health through reforming health systems, strengthening healthcare management, and improving healthcare delivery. He was the co-director of the Center for Health Policy at the University of Chicago, an adjunct professor of health policy at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, and a fellow at the Department of Social Policy at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He has dedicated his professional experience to reforming health systems towards preventative care and to create a market for healthy aging. So it's safe to say that it was a privilege to have him as a guest. Now, in this episode, we discussed in detail the topic of longevity. There's a great chance you've heard this word by now, and certainly if you're a listener on this show, but it means different things to different people. So Dr. Antoun starts by defining what it even means to him and how he has devoted his career to the practices of longevity and healthy aging. Now, the first part of the episode explores that goal of longevity from a perspective of achieving health versus avoiding disease. We then dovetail into the various ways to promote longevity with a heavy emphasis on nutrition and specifically fasting. That term fasting, or more popular term intermittent fasting, is being talked about more and more frequently, but what you may not have heard is the fasting mimicking diet. Dr. Antoun has worked closely with the pioneer who coined that term, so we also discuss in detail what that means and how it may be even more beneficial. Depending on your viewpoint, this can be a polarizing topic, much like anything in nutrition. As a matter of fact, you might note that even we disagreed on some important points regarding specific macronutrient consumption for performance and healthy aging. But ultimately, I hope you'll leave this interview a bit more informed, like Darsh and I did. And lastly, I want to highlight and apologize in advance for the pinging noise you may hear. That was clearly an oversight, but appeared to be an internal sound within one of our systems and wasn't picked up until after the fact. And as you can guess, it was too late at that point. Nevertheless, it shouldn't disrupt the discussion too much. Now, without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Dr. Joseph Antoun. All right, Dr. Antoun, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you today?
I'm stoked. How are you doing?
Excellent. Look forward to hopefully changing somebody's life or somebody's career today. We'll see.
Right on. This is an interesting topic, a topic that's near and dear to my heart, particularly as of late over the last couple of years. As many folks here know, that sports medicine is kind of my passion and has been my calling for a long time, but this is something that's taken, a deep interest of mine and something that I've wished to learn more about. And it's also something that I think a lot of folks now who follow closely just the health and wellness space are learning more about and talking more about it. And that's, of course, the topic of longevity. And so I want to jump right into it. And I want to ask you, because this is something that you've devoted much of your career to, is what does that word longevity mean to you?
Longevity for me is probably, when I hear it, I hear more health span rather than longevity, meaning I want to live healthy long. I don't want to live, I remember I was an adjunct professor at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. That was back in 2000, probably 13, 14. And we did a survey. We asked people, do you want to increase your longevity? And 60% said no, to our surprise. And when we asked them the second question, why no? Because they're like, I don't want to be in pain like my grandma, right? I don't want to die like my grandpa. So they directly remember the suffering, and especially today with chronic diseases, right? This is one of the main reason why I transitioned from medicine to what I do today, is like they remember somebody sick long. They don't remember somebody healthy long and then sudden death, which is what I hear with longevity. I want to live healthy long and then die fast. And if my wife doesn't kill me, before that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love that. Or it's much more of like adding life to your years rather than adding or I should say,
Yeah.
adding life to your adding years to your life, right? So now you talked a little bit about kind of the inception of this idea that creeped into your mind, but tell us a little bit about your background. I know you've had extensive amounts of schooling, as you mentioned. You were right off before we got online here. You were talking about starting in medical school as well. What brought you to your journey and what you're studying now?
So, I started, my passion was literally to help patients, cure them and help them become healthy again. And this is why I went to med school. And then I wanted to be a cardiologist, and that was my passion. And I remember my rotations at Mass General Hospital, and I was so excited to kind of, the residency at MGH and get a career in cardiology after that. But at the same time, I was sitting in feeling that I'm being taught how to prescribe a pill. So first, how to meet a person after they're sick. Number two, so we're practicing sick care rather than healthcare. Number two, I'd never had a solution to get them back to normal. So if they have a blood pressure, it was the blood pressure pill for the rest of their life, and then the blood sugar pill for the rest of their life, and then the cholesterol pill for the rest of their life. And then probably we're going to add 2-3 pills every 6 to 12 months that we see them, or every 2 years. And there was no plan to getting them off any of those pills. So I felt that as a cardiologist, I would be, of course, there's a great value, supporting a lot of people, especially in the acute setting, and heart failure and infarct and all of that. But besides that, the chronic, the everyday routine was about literally putting them on pills and not having a plan for them to go off a blood pressure or a blood glucose pill. And then I was very passionate about diabetes. And the more I learned what we do with diabetes, it was shocking. Basically, the diabetes pills that we give are taking the blood glucose. If you don't change your lifestyle, the blood sugar doesn't disappear. It's just you're either supporting the secretion or the sensitization of getting the blood out of the vessel to the tissue. And when it goes into the cell, the excess sugar goes into fat, so you increase insulin resistance. And therefore meaning it's a disease where every time we give a pill we're accelerating the patient forward, right? You're just, instead of teaching the patient how not to eat carbs or how to live a healthy life or to burn carbs with exercise or to stress less or to sleep better or whatever, all the lifestyle medicine you can practice, which didn't exist in med school. When I went to med school, we were giving them a pill, and the everyone is shying from saying the truth or talking about the truth, which is a sensitizer of getting the glucose from the blood to the tissue. If you have excess glucose, you're turning that into excess fat, and therefore more insulin resistance, and therefore more diabetes. And this is why the plan, you start with metformin, you add another oral, then another, then you start with injectable, then you add another, and insulin is the worst of the worst, where by the end you're just accelerating weight gain and adding one form of insulin to the other. So I was like shocked with how we accepted to build a system that does sick care. And it's okay to do sick care. I mean, people get sick, you got to help them, but the help wasn't enough, in my opinion. And this is what I started reading more and more about disease etiologies and figuring out that actually a lot of the diseases we were looking at are lifestyle related, whether it's pre-diabetes, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, PCOS. And then the more I read, the more cancer goes back to also lifestyle. And now Alzheimer's, we call it diabetes type 3. So I found out that it's the way we age and the way we accelerate aging with unhealthy lifestyle that's leading to those diseases, right? And a lot of the books we study in, they tell us, it's genetics, right? And then when you look into it, like, it's not genetics. I mean, and even if you have the ApoE gene, you're not going to get Alzheimer's at age 20. You're not going to get, if you have cancer in your family, you're not going to get your first cancer in most cases at age 17, and you're not going to get diabetic type 2 at age 23. Now, you can get diabetes type 2 at age 23 if you overeat and you get accelerated aging and accelerated, and then you get it. So figure out that, wait a second, we're all living the consequences of heavy dollars getting into randomized clinical trials behind pills. Therefore, they get into their medical books, and therefore we get taught in a way to diagnose and give a pill for everyone. And again, I'm not against that system. I think that system is wonderful, but has to be has its own timing rather than being all medicine. And I felt that we need lifestyle medicine to be added to medicine. And so after my graduation, I didn't go into residency. I went and did health policy. I stayed at the Kennedy School, Harvard Kennedy School, and did public health at Hopkins. And my passion became, how can we build systems that are more preventative, they look more into lifestyle, and how can I help ministries of health around the world to embrace these practices? And I spent a good number of years traveling around the world, meeting a lot of ministries of health and policymakers and trying to do that. And I hit a roadblock because these are recommendations. The problem with prevention and why prevention doesn't take off pretty fast, because you're telling people to eat healthy. They know that. And every average Joe on the street knows that. You're telling them you should exercise. Everyone knows that. You're telling them stop smoking. Everyone knows that. The problem is that you know what you should do, but in the micro moment where you're hungry and there's a burger in front of you, or when you're tired and you have to go to the gym, but you don't want to go to the gym, or when you're in the mood for a cigarette because you're a little bit stressed and you need a cigarette. This is where the product called food, called stay lazy on the couch, or called smoking is winning over the recommendation. So my solution was, we got to get a product the same way pharma has products in prevention. So how can I productize prevention so that people consume health rather than consume bad behavior or think about health? And this is what took me to the biotech industry. I was a physician with health policy and public health skills. I didn't have business skills. I didn't know how to discover any product. So when I joined the biotech industry, I learned how to discover products, price, reimbursement, launching, marketing, sales. And I started after that, resigned and started looking for what is the product that can be consumed and keep people healthier longer. And this is how I met the company, the founder of the company that I'm at today. We can talk more about that, but how I met the notion of nutrition and fasting, and the fasting mimicking nutrition. And I found a product that can help us with prevention and or potential disease remission. And this is what I spend the last
Dr.
years of my life.
I can deeply relate to what you talk about, right, in terms of sick care versus healthcare. And of course, there's always going to be a time for sick care. I mean, that's what hospitals are primarily there for, right? A patient comes into the emergency room, maybe they're very sick, they get admitted to, internal medicine or a surgery team. And then from there, I think that's where that transition can at least happen to looking more towards lifestyle prevention and teaching. But you alluded to the fact that we need to consume health. And the reason why prevention doesn't necessarily take off is because it's nothing new to us. We already understand that we need to eat healthy and stop smoking, right? So we do currently live in this dopamine crazed world, or this world where we need to find something new. And so tell us about L-Nutra, right? Because that's something you're doing. And, in the last decade, fasting is that one thing that a lot of people have clinged on to, right? And now said, oh, weight loss, or, oh, wow, there's so many benefits to that. So tell us about L-Nutra, tell us about fasting and really your concept of it and what you think fasting is doing at this current state.
So to bridge the first question to this one, in between leaving the biotech and looking at finding the company that I'm at today, I learned something that was life-changing, and that's going to link it to fasting. What I learned is that, and it was CEO of an aging institute, and who told me you all got it wrong in medicine. I'm like, what do you mean? And I was offended, right? I'm like, MD, PhD, health policy, Harvard, Hopkins, what do you mean I got it all wrong? And he was like, you think Alzheimer's is different than cancer, is different than diabetes, is different than cardiovascular disease. I'm like, of course they're different. One is in the brain, one is in the heart, one is... He's like, no. It's like saying, he said, if they were independent, if they were dependent, and each one is, if they were independent, each one had a different genetics and different system and different... Why you don't get Alzheimer's at age 20? Why you don't get a heart attack at age 27? Why? They all happen at later stage in life. They happen because your body has been used. And if you use it in a healthy way, you would delay the onset of these chronic diseases. And if you abuse your body and abuse your body in an unhealthy way, they're going to happen at a younger age. But they're all the expression of aging. And the example is like, if you drive a car, if you buy a new car and you drive it for 600,000 miles, and suddenly you press on the window bottom and it doesn't go down, you don't say, oh, the manufacturer did a mistake on my window, right? But this is what we do in medicine. We say, oh, you have a genetic predisposition, and now you get a blood clot, and now you have a heart attack, and so even if you help him with the heart attack, the brain is going to come next because he's overweight, he's stressed, he's accelerating his aging, and this guy biologically, although he's 65 biologically he's like 75, and he's going to develop the second incident soon. And this is why now we see all these correlations. We look at them as aha moment is, oh, diabetics have 2x risk of cancer. Of course, it's the same thing. It's acceleration of aging that will lead to one of each. And now we call Alzheimer's diabetes type 3, of course. And even diabetes is not a diabetes disease, it's an acceleration of aging disease. And plus the weight, of course, and the metabolic. So the biggest aha moment I got is if you want to practice healthcare, you want to focus on biological age, the unit of measurement. And today in health, we don't have a unit of measurement. And to me, it's biological age. Because that's the biggest predictor of one of these 4 chronic diseases: diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular, and autoimmune, and Alzheimer's or neurodegenerative. And this is what's going to kill 90% of us. 90% of us will die out of one of these 4 diseases, and they're all correlated with aging. They all happen at later stage in life. So what's the solution to prevention is to decelerate the aging, the pace of aging. And therefore, even if you're 70 or 75, if biologically you're 60 or 65, you just gain 10 extra years of healthy life. That's the best way to practice health span, to reconnect to your first question about longevity. And even if otherwise we go back to the pill system where you take a statin, you block one receptor only, you solve one portion only, or today people taking Ozempic for weight. These solve one pathway, one fraction. But the body is aging, and when the body is aging, if you're going to solve my cholesterol thing today a little bit, I'm going to have the cancer, I'm going to have the Alzheimer's, I'm going to have the neurodegenerative, I'm going to have heart attack regardless, because if I don't change my lifestyle, I'm still eating bad. Even if you save me on one pathway, there's many other parts of my body that are getting accelerated aging. So my passion, my big aha moment became, how can I find a product that can slow down aging or reverse aging? Because now you're talking about creating a delta between chronological age and biological age, and therefore giving people a true years of health span. And then I met this, when I left the biotech industry, I literally was on a plane traveling to every aging. I was like, it's a fantasy to slow down aging or reverse it. And I started visiting every aging researchers, whether it's the David Sinclair at Harvard, whether it's the Somalogic people in Boulder, whether it's the Buck Institute for Research on Aging in San Francisco. And most of them in Europe and Singapore, even the National University of Singapore. And then most of them were pointing at Walter Longo, Professor Walter Longo, who's the head of the Longevity Institute at University of Southern California. And they were like, look, we're all working on pills, again, which means one pathway, which means it might work, it might not, which means it might have side effects, which means if there's one tiny side effects, people will not take it for the next 4 years to gain one extra year. The only guy that has a natural phenomenon for reversing aging is Walter Longo at USC, because he discovered fasting, the biological benefits of fasting. We're not talking about fasting for 16 hours. We'll talk about intermittent fasting. We're talking about fasting for multiple days. So what basically the big discovery that Walter had and USC had is that if you fast this body for 2 or 3 or more days, there's a crisis. So the first 2 days, we all have a little bit of extra fat. We all have a little bit of glycogen. We all have, the liver can do some neoglycogenesis, right? So the first couple of days, we have some money in the bank. We have some credit card, a little bit, and we can borrow from the bank. This is liver, glycogen, and fat, and we can get by the first 2 days. This is why intermittent fasting, 16 hours, 20 hours, 1 meal a day, they're great for weight, right? It's a weight intervention. And I know a lot of bloggers, a lot of recent book publishers say you're going to have autophagy with 16 hours, and that's not going to happen. It's the second big aha for all of you guys. 16 hours of, if you skip breakfast, you're not rejuvenating your body. It's like telling a CEO who needs $2 million to operate a company, well, I'll give you in 5 hours your money. He's going to just wait for it 5 hours, and his money in the bank will drop a fraction of 5 hours divided by 30 days. multiplied by 2 million. So you're going to lose a little bit of weight, but there's no crisis. There's no depletion of the reserves. And autophagy is a second line of defense of the body that happens after you deplete your reserve. So if you watch Guido Kromer, who's the biggest, expert on autophagy, he tells you 3 to 4 days of fasting. If you listen to the Austrian experts on autophagy and spermidine, and if you listen to Walter Longo, 1, 2, 3 days. So Walter thinks 2 days plus. And of course, there's no absolute answer. If you're thin, high metabolic rate, you're exercising, you're going to get into it after 1.5 day to 2 days. If you have a lot of reserves and you have slow metabolism, it's going to take you 3 days to get into it. But we know it's not 16 hours for most people, unless you run the marathon at the same time. Within 16 hours, you create a big deficit. So
Dr. Antoun, I want to, sorry to interject there. I want to jump in on that point right there, because I think that's a buzzword that people use a lot. And that's one of those words that sounds sciencey, and maybe, as you're suggesting, the science doesn't necessarily support it in the short term. But, my understanding from, again, basic chemistry learning and microbiology and undergrad and whatnot is autophagy is kind of happening even in the times of nutrient excess, right? There are several different types, right? You have mitophagy, you have chaperone-mediated autophagy, and then maybe just macroautophagy. Are there certain types of autophagy that we're specifically addressing at this point? Like, are there times where it's quality control that's happening at all times? Is it not?
Yeah, it's part of the physiology and the correction and the body getting senescent damage and fixing. But here we're specifically talking about a full body at the same time synchronous autophagy as a defense of fasting. We're not talking about the fluctuation. It's the same thing. Even stem cells, like every moment of every minute of your body, you're producing a little bit of stem cells. You're killing some of the cells with apoptosis. That's the balance of rejuvenation.
Okay.
But what I'm talking about here is a total body suffering from fasting, and therefore a total body rejuvenation and autophagy. And that's not going to happen in 10 hours or 12 or 14 or 16. So basically, Walter Longo, who has in mice for the last 20 years have been studying all different phases of fasting, and the 1 hour all the way to multiple days, has noticed two important things. Number one is fasting can help you with rejuvenation and therefore potentially slowing down your age or reversing your biological clock. So this is, if you're healthy, it's a very important thing to get younger, right? And this is how we can create how we can add more life to life. Let me use the same words you guys used. Number two, and that's our mission. If you look at our website, L-Nutra, it says add life to life. And then number two is even more important from a medical standpoint, and what brought me to L-Nutra is he discovered that if you put your body into this fasting / autophagy / rejuvenation crisis, the body is trying to survive and therefore does not allow dysfunction. So if you have cancer, if you have diabetes, if you have cardiovascular, does the body try to fix? Now that metabolically you're losing the weight and you're optimizing all the metabolic health, cellularly you're optimizing cellular function. Would this combination be the magic of biology that can repair, remit, regress from a chronic disease? And when I met him 6.5 years ago, he had mice data showing that he can take mice cured from cancer from 36% to 93%. He was showing reversal of diabetes in mice, and he got a patent on all of this. He was showing that if you destroy the pancreas of a mice to no insulin production and you fast the mice, the stem cells reactivate the pancreas and reheal and reproduce insulin. So it was literally magical in mice. And my assumption was a fraction of that happens in humans. We got the first dietary intervention that can really become medicine or an addition to medicine. And now, 6 years after and 18 clinical trials after, we have a lot of fascinating data on what prolonged fasting can do to the body. So when USC and Walter Longo were transitioning from mice data, you can fast mice on water. Well, they went to human, and the first trial was on cancer. It was basically trying to starve cancer before you hit it with chemo. And Mayo Clinic and USC were doing the trial, and it took them 1.5 years to recruit 6 people because nobody wanted to fast for 5 days or 4 days. It was too difficult. And this is where they wrote to the NIH They show the mice data, which was unbelievable, again, beyond anything medicine has seen from a cure rate of many chronic disease in mice. And they asked the FDA to support to develop the fasting mimicking diet, meaning let's feed this buddy a formulation that does not get recognized by the endocrine and the cellular system of food recognition. So it's a formulation of food that you can eat, that the patient would eat over 4 or 5 days, and the body is not recognizing the food, therefore the body is fasting. And I'm pretty sure you guys want to know how and how it works. So there's two ways you recognize, two major pathways or ways that the body recognizes food. When you eat, fat doesn't spike anything in the blood, but mainly carbs spike insulin, as you know. It's a growth factor, and it's you bring a source of calories, and insulin tries to take it to the cell and tell the cell you can grow. And you eat protein, and you increase IGF, insulin-like growth factor. These are two endocrine ways to tell the body from a systemic standpoint that, hey, there's one of the two nutrient elements in the body, therefore we're good, we're not fasting, so one of the major determinants of the fasting mimicking nutrition is the level of proteins. It's a plant-based sequence of proteins that does not, and the sequence of amino acid that do not spike IGF, and complex carbs, and again, there's a lot of secrets in the combination that do not spike insulin. So when you consume the fasting mimicking diet, you barely have a mild, long plateau of IGF and insulin. Therefore, the body does not feel that spike, and from an endocrine system, there's no recognition of the food. Then when you get to the cells, the cell recognizes nutrients through PKA, RAS, and the TOR pathways. If you remember, the TOR pathway responds to the protein mainly, PKA and RAS to the carbs, but they intermingle within the cell. So how can you go through these pathways but not hyperactivate them, so that they're like, the cell is being nourished but not enough to be satisfied? And to put this in a non-scientific way is I always give the example of this CEO that has a company, and he needs $2 million per month. It's like a body needing 2,000 calories, say, to operate, right? Any low-calorie diet will give you less than 2,000 or $2 million, so say 1,600, or you give that CEO $1.6 million. The bank drops a little bit. It's a weight loss, normal diets. Weight loss, the bank drops, and this is how you move forward. Fasting, you come and you give that CEO $0. And you can see how a CEO with $0, the bank account drops by 2 million, which you lose fast. That's great, right? 73% of Americans are overweight and could benefit. We could benefit from that. But you can see how the deficit is so big that CEO is not going to just wait for the bank account to drop every month by 2 million. He's going to go and fix the company. He's going to go cut any unnecessary expenditure. He's going to maybe let go some people who are not working well. He's going to optimize this. He's not going to tolerate something going wrong as a survival mode. And that's exactly what autophagy in the body is and what happens. So the fasting mimicking diet basically comes to that CEO. But you can understand, if you give $0 to the CEO, he's also going to make, there are some decisions that are going to be negative. Meaning, if you're a superstar employee and you see the company has no money, you're going to leave that company. If the CEO doesn't have money to order supplies for next month, he's not going to be able to sell and get revenues next month. So pure water fast for many days has positives and negatives. And all the fasting bloggers, they talk about positives, they don't talk about negatives. There's a lot of negatives when you have 0 calories to it, but we live on food. Our body needs macro and micronutrients and to survive and to thrive. And so when you do water fast, you do a lot of good and you do some damage as well. The same way that CEO next month is not going to have supply, he's not going to have his best employee, cannot fund his IT, etc. The fasting mimicking diet is ideal here because you come to that CEO, say you need $2 million, I'm going to give you $800,000. And so he can at least cover his basics, but he still has a stress of 1.2 million. That's enough of a stress for him also to jump and fix. So what we do with the fasting mimicking, we give enough nutrition to maintain, sustain, and even to fund the rejuvenation, while at the same time keeping the high stress of the restructure and the autophagy. And that has been like a perfect balance of putting stress without the damage, if you want, which is better than water fast, and of course, better than keeping the overweight and or the health conditions that we're trying to study on. So
That's truly awesome. I really appreciate it, and of course appreciate the the finance analogies. I think that kind of helps keep it together a little bit. A couple of follow-up questions I want to ask you. Just so I'm going to restate, just so for the listener, if they didn't keep follow along there, the purpose of the FMD here was really to, one, from an effectiveness standpoint, again, no food for 5 days is tremendously intimidating, and that's not something that could get somebody to sign up for.
Yeah.
But the idea is to, one, keep those responses, mimic, the response from fasting, but to this key point that there's a special sequence of amino acids. So we're trying to keep that IS, insulin IGF growth factor, or insulin-like growth factor, trying to keep that low. That is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it's a full macro and micronutrients for 5 days. So
Gotcha.
basically, you order it, you get it delivered to your house. You eat day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and the entire nutrition is based on sequences of protein that would not spike your IGF, complex carbs that get absorbed slowly, and by the time they get to the blood and into the cell, they don't spike insulin nor PK or RAF pathways.
Right.
And there's high healthy fat, because fats they don't spike any of the food recognition pathway. When you eat fat, especially healthy fat, this is like just it's food. It's a brain-like keto-like food for the brain, but nothing gets spiked from fat. So the secret is you get high healthy fat, you get controlled low protein but plant-based with specific sequence of amino acid that doesn't spike IGF. And you get controlled carbs plus the minerals, the vitamins, and everything else you need for the day.
Gotcha.
And you eat it over 5 days, and your body thinks you're fasting for 5 days, although you're eating for 5 days.
Now, why 5 days? Can we do 4? Can we do 6?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's my second podcast of today. I got the same question today.
So maybe it's not such a good question.
No, it's a great question. People always think about it. So if you go below 5 days, so let's say you do 2 or 3 days, then you're barely touching on autophagy. Remember here, the goal is to and the product is called Prolon. If people are asking like what is the product, is called PROLON. So if Prolon was only 2 days, then most people wouldn't even touch autophagy, right? And 3 days or 4 days, you barely get 1 day, and many people get an autophagy on day 4 because they have enough reserves in their body, they have enough that can sustain the 3 days, they have low metabolic rate. So 5 days ensures that most people doing Prolon actually would get to a certain level of autophagy, while of course they lose a lot of weight doing weight. On average, you lose, if you're a woman, you lose around 5.2 pounds. If you're a male, you lose close to that 7-8 pounds within just 5 days. So there's one of the secrets here I will reveal is it protects lean body mass. So the biggest challenge, and another issue, another passion of mine besides diabetes controversy of accelerating diabetes with the pills, is this dieting cycles. And I'm against the on and off dieting, because the problem is every time you diet, you lose weight, which is great, but you lose muscle at the same time, because the first thing the body goes to is liver and muscle before fat, right? So we lose muscle. And then guess what? We go off diet because the diet industry wants us to diet every day. And then one day you're on diet, one day you're off diet. And when you're off diet, you regain back your weight. Now, the low-calorie diets, they slow your metabolism and you lose muscle. Then guess what happens? You pick up fat faster. So you're swapping every cycle of on and off dieting. You're swapping muscle with fat. And that's the dangerous prescription to get closer to an overweight in a pre-diabetes setting. What's unique about fasting is that you don't lose lean body mass, because fasting, remember, works by stress, not by calorie deficit. The stress of the CEO, if you gave that CEO 1.8 million, he's not going to fix it. If you give him that 800,000 or zero, this is what he's going to, the stress of fixing. Autophagy is a response to an acute stress of calorie deficit, not a prolonged stress. This is why ketogenic diet, if you do it every day, you don't hear much about autophagy or rejuvenation with the ketogenic diet, because it's soft. It's a soft level of fasting, and there's enough proteins in the ketogenic diet. So the body is bouncing in and out of ketosis. Like, okay, I'm super low on carb, That's a big deficit on one of my sources of calories, but I have enough protein, so I should not be fasting because the TOR pathway is triggered and IGF is high. What to do? The chronic ketogenic diet is a confusing setting for the body. But again, any diet you do today, unless you exercise, is you're potentially losing muscle and decreasing metabolic rate to swap it, unless you do high protein diet and you're at the gym all the time. And what I like about fasting and the fasting mimicking diet, and we have a patent filed and a full trial on athletes on the fasting mimicking diet showing that it protects your lean body mass. Why? You have stress. Stress increases cortisol and growth hormone. So therefore you have a pro muscle and muscle tone. So the muscle rejuvenating, you have autophagy happening, and you have a growth hormone making sure that the muscle tone and the muscle function is protected. And this is not sci-fi. This is exactly what the body has learned to do for hundreds of thousands of years. If there's no food, the body wants to turn fat into ketones to keep the brain up, because if you faint, will be exterminated. And growth hormone as a stress to keep the muscle tone up, because if you don't walk, you're not going to find the next food. So we're just harvesting what nature has built into us with fasting. And this is, again, the third element. What I like about fasting, it just comes from nature, from human evolution. It's not a new artificial imposition. There's 600 diets out there, and each one of them takes you away from your homeostatic human evolution pathway. Interjecting back fasting into our life is actually rematching our body with human evolution. And the body knew what to do, is to store when there's food, and then you use the storage and you rejuvenate when there was no food. And when we lost that practice of rejuvenate when there was no food 40, 50 years ago, and we had abundance of food, we started accelerating our aging, becoming overweight, diabetes increase, cardiovascular increase, cancer increase, Alzheimer's increase, despite spending $4 trillion. All of them are increasing in our lifespan. We just lost 0.4 years of lifespan in the US. So nothing is working towards that longevity.
Dr. Antoun, I do want to specify a point. You mentioned for preservation of lean body mass, that fasting doesn't tend to affect that. I do remember reading a meta-analysis maybe a couple of months ago. I think it was like in 2019 in one of the International Obesity Journal, I think in like London or something. And in that study that they had showed, they had compared for obese individuals, both intermittent energy restriction and continuous energy restriction. And ultimately it was looking at weight loss. I think this was a meta-analysis, but I remember specifically the IER group, they did not hold on to lean body mass as much. So when you say that, are you specifically referring to fasting mimicking that? Prolonged.
Yeah. The intermittent fasting, again, there's a big buzz around, it's autophagy. It is not. It's just skipping one meal. And by the way, this is why the recent data on intermittent fasting doesn't even show a lot of weight loss, because people binge eat after. It's right. If you practice it right, and the way to practice intermittent fasting right is not to skip in the morning as much as to skip the night before. Meaning eat early, eat your dinner early, spend your 12 hours, and then eat something in the morning. All the skipping breakfast trials, they don't show you longevity from doing that. This is why we're a company of fasting with food, not fasting without food, because food is important. You know why you lose weight if you skip breakfast? Because in the morning, you have a high demand on calorie. You're thinking versus sleeping, you're moving if you go to the gym, and you're at work, so you need calories. But guess what? For the essential organs, your brain, your heart, your kidneys, and you need to nourish them. So this is why we do it with food. Is same example at that CEO that I gave you. You got to finance the operation of your body, while, hey, if you can keep some positive stress, like you said, autophagy happens all the time in the body. If you can skew a little bit more of this autophagy, and make it happen and rejuvenate your body while you're eating, that's the optimum state.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our previous guests, episode 31, Dr. Amy Shah, talks about it in terms of circadian fasting, right? So exactly what you mentioned, eating in the morning, it's more respective to our biology, and then cutting it at night, right?
So we study centenarians, people living 100 and beyond, and one of the most common factors, no one of them does 16 hours of water fast or 18 hours of water fast a day, but all of them, they sleep early, they wake up, and they eat something in the morning, but they do that circadian 12. Because circadian, again, we go back, I'm a big proponent of rematching your body with what your body has evolved to do. And until we discovered, electricity and Uber Eats and Netflix and late night staying, we were sleeping early. And sleep is important. We say, oh, sleep is important for your brain. Sleep is important for the clock of every organ. And that was we talk about the Nobel Prize in Medicine on autophagy in 2016. 2017 was the Nobel Prize on the biological clock of every organ. So you should not be eating late at night, because then your entire GI system is up and your entire brain is up, and every part of your body is now in anabolic state. And you can see that a lot of people, when they eat and sleep, they even dream, they have bad dreams and reflux and all of that. So if you really want your entire body to sleep, you have to eat early and then sleep after a few hours, and then try to have something in the morning. That's a better circadian 12-hour fast. But to go back to the muscle, it's a prolonged fast. It's a fasting mimicking diet that preserve lean body mass. And we do have a trick there for lean body mass, by the way. Some people say, how come you have in your soups a little bit high carbs at night? And this is one of our secrets, is when you give a little bit of a small spike of insulin at night before you sleep, you actually, and the growth hormone is high from the stress of fasting, that combination protects the muscle. And this is a big difference that we have and we have a full article, randomized clinical trial, published on that for athletes. We went all the way, not just to normal people. Normal people, we showed that, and went male athletes doing the prolonged fasting mimicking diet to preserve.
Dr. Antoun, I also want to ask, what's the optimal frequency for FMD per year?
So the FMD, you guys are familiar with it, you're using the acronym, but it's a fasting mimicking diet, or roll-on. Well, the answer is, again, it depends. We don't want to generalize, but I'll give you like 3-4 profiles, right? If you're say in your 30s or low 40s, so relatively young, you're not kind of a pre-disease or and you can still burn fat fast, your metabolism is not that slow, and you want to do it mainly for rejuvenation. What I'm trying to say is, you don't have a health goal in mind, and you're not overweight if you're active, you can do it just 2 to 3 times a year. And this is a very there's few CEOs that will tell you, you can only do my diet 2 or 3 times a year rather than every day, right? And this is where this is why we have a movement that trusts us and follow us. And you just need to do it 2 or 3 times a year. If you're a resident at a hospital, if you're a doctor, young doctor, and you're still active, just 2 to 3 times per year. And by the way, we have 14,000 clinicians registered with us. They provide Prolon in their clinics. And the number one consumers that most people have done over 20 cycles of Prolons are actually physicians and nurses and dietitians. So now if you say, hey, I'm between 40 and 65, this is the pre-disease state, I started feeling aging, I'm not taking easily off the weight that I'm carrying, and this is the pre-cancerous, pre-diabetes, pre-acute heart attack, right? Acute cardiovascular event. This is where maybe you want to do it 4 times a year. And if you have more weight to shed, or you're, pre-conditioned, then you can do it a little bit more frequent. But this is where we touch the 4 times. Now, we just finished 2 trials on diabetes, one on diabetic kidney that we just published. It was done at Heidelberg University in Germany. And we published it actually 3 days ago at Journal of Clinical Endocrinology. We're showing that if you have early damage on the kidney, and you're showing microalbuminuria, if you do 6 cycles. So when you get to health condition, we touch the 6 cycles per year. And if you're starting a diabetic kidney, 6 cycles is where you want to do. We just finished another trial, randomized clinical trial in Holland, in Leiden, one of the biggest hospital systems there, showing that if you do Prolon 6 times per year, you're increasing your risk of or chance of remission and regression from the disease by 700% versus current medicine. So if you're diabetic, the protocol was once a month. Most people did it 6 to 8 months, but it was once a month. Diabetic patients randomized, they're on metformin. They were randomized into 2 arms, and they were seen by their doctors up to 1 year. So at 12 months, we look at who needed more medicine, who just stayed on metformin, and who were reversed. And the chance of needing less medicine was 700% more for the folks who did 5 days only per month of fasting and mimicking diet versus the ones who just had their normal diabetes education or health education.
What's the age group for that cohort that you mentioned?
It was variable. I don't remember exact, but it was in
So
tiny
adults.
age group. Yeah, it's
I see. Okay.
adults type 2 diabetes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty profound. You said that one's already published, or that's still underway?
No, that's underway.
Underway.
The one that got published was in diabetic kidney.
Gotcha. The other question I wanted to, coming back to your point about, you mentioned lean mass preservation depending on the type of carbohydrates that they're taking with a prolonged diet. And it begs the question of whether or not that acute period of 5 days affects performance at all. Because in my world, I take care of a lot of athletes in sports medicine, and I know that's something that they're not going to tolerate. I know we've been spending a lot of time talking about just healthy aging and just, looking 30, 40 years down the road. But in the acute phase, you're mentioning even within a year, we're seeing tremendous effects for health. So is that something that you guys have looked at internally, or there's studies of in that 5-day period, if that affects performance at all?
Yeah, actually, I told you the muscle protection was done on athlete males. So these were, and I'll give you some secrets. I mean, God protect his soul, but Kobe Bryant used to do it, and he used to take peptides after. So a lot of the big athletes that do prolon, they basically do it either during the resting phase or when they have an injury or the off season or the preseason, and they follow with peptides. They do protein because the cells are primed, they're rejuvenated, they're primed. You give them protein right after on day 6 onwards, and a lot of them report that they're doing bench press that they've never reached before, or they're running fast, or the Sky team, the Olympic winners of the UK team, the cyclists, they do prolon to protect the muscle. And these guys, they have to cut the last fat so that the weight on the bicycle is not impacting their speed. There's a lot of the NFL Hall of Fame was wanted to endorse prolon. A lot of Hall of Famers do prolon. So actually, when you come to an athlete and say, "Hey, you should fast," they're like, "No, I just should eat protein 6 times a day. I should never fast." And it's actually the opposite, by the way, because 2 things needs to happen. These people, instead of growing muscle by tearing and accelerating their aging by eating 6 times proteins every day, they should compensate for that high IGF state by doing cycles of fasting. In the cycles of fasting they should do, again, if you do intermittent, you're just cutting your muscle and losing your metabolic rate. The fasting mimicking diet keeps that stress high and keeps feeding minimal their muscle in their body. So they actually protect lean body mass and they only cut fat. And that's very important. This is a concept that we're launching very soon. We call it balancing long and strong. You want to be strong as an athlete, but the problem you're curbing if you're hyperproteinizated. I personally call it diabetes of protein. We all have been bombarded by eat protein as many times per day. This is all good. The number one reason for acceleration of cancer risk is the IGF spike. There are many articles showing that it's this protein intake that spiked cancer. Because when you spike IGF, you're pushing your cells to replicate. And once you're between that age 40 and 60, you have enough, the cells still respond to IGF. They still are young enough to replicate, but they're old enough to do a mistake. This is where the cancer risk spikes. And this is why you see cancer more between that age than at 85. You don't die at 85, 90 from cancer, but you die at 60 and 50 from cancer. It's that balance of old enough for the cell to do a mistake and become cancerous, but it's still young enough to respond to an IGF spike and replicate that triggers cancer. And these things you would not hear in any medical book. These are things that we learned by doing the right study on what happens and why cancer spikes happen. And our founder Volta Longo just published an article, a meta-analysis on IGF. You will be interested in this if you're a sports medicine aficionado. 3 months ago, we published a meta-analysis on IGF and what is the ideal IGF number so that you balance strong and long. You want the theory of eating protein, high protein every day. If that works, we will all be like Ronnie Coleman-like, because we eat a lot of protein and we train, and then we barely increase every 6 months a little bit, right? So you're paying the price, but you're accelerating aging every day. Every day you're boosting your IGF and insulin, and every day you're accelerating your aging for a slight gain in muscle mass. And so what we're trying to say is, first, you don't need to accelerate. There's a diminishing marginal return on having a high state of IGF for a muscle standpoint. So what is that healthy incremental increase that is good for your muscle without over exceeding that? Because otherwise you're just pushing aging for no return on your muscle. And that's not the zone that you want to be at.
So you mentioned high protein. If we could put some numbers on it, like what do you mean by high when you say that? Or
again, it goes back to the BMI and the person and the goal and the objective. But the WHO would say, 0.7, 0.8 is where you want to be. If you're an active person, you want to go touch the 1.1. But these levels of 2 and 3 and 4, unless you're like going for Mr. Olympia, we believe these are just super high acceleration of aging with super low marginal return on muscle. Otherwise,
is that grams per kg or grams per pound? With those numbers per pound, okay.
Per pound. The kg would be 0.35, right? 0.35, 0.30.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
So we recommend typically the protein industry who wants you to drink a protein and diet on protein every day, wants you to go for these high numbers. But again, we're saying, look in front of you. Are people getting buff every month? No, they need time. They need to exercise. So therefore, there's a decreased marginal return. And by the way, the ones who are getting very buff are dying young, right? Ronnie Coleman, we lost him at age 55. It's very well known. If you think about acromegaly, for example, these people naturally have high growth hormone and IGF. And it's well published that they lose 10 years of their life, right? Acromegaly folks, and even if you create models in mice with high IGF, they die out of cancer. So it's clear that high protein, high carb, meaning insulin-like growth factor, they're both growth factors. We grow forward with aging. And therefore, if you have high insulin, high IGF, they're both as bad as good when they're always high in terms of accelerating aging and getting the onset of.
So I've read the longevity diet by Walter Longo, right? And he makes a point in terms of I believe it's the U-shaped curve with protein, right? So when you're younger, you kind of want a higher intake. And I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong here in terms of the ages, but about up to 50 years old, you're at maybe, yeah.
Yeah, when you're older, 65. After 65, you want to go back on high protein. Why? Because again, your cells are too old to respond with replication. The risk of cancer decrease, but you're having absorption issues. Muscle becomes an organ of longevity at that age. You need to move. You need to keep active. So after age 65, the body response to protein in terms of IGF is anyhow low. The risk of cancer goes a little bit lower, and you have more. You want to preserve muscle as much as possible at that age. So the ratio of risk return starts flipping after that age 65. And we recommend, like you said, if you're young, you can have high protein, you need to grow physically and muscle and all of that, and you have low risk of cancer and diabetes and heart attack. At that age, after 65, same thing. Between that 40 to 65 age is when it's tricky. Your pre-acute onset of cancer and or cardiovascular events, and this is where it's important for us to balance, again, long and strong rather than being high protein.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're not against protein, we're just saying too much protein is like too much carb. And I call it the diabetes of protein.
Right. Would you change your opinion for those who are weightlifting at least, or are you still saying that number should hold true regardless of who it is?
Again, I always said it depends, right? If your goal is to weightlift and build muscle, of course you're going to be at a higher level. But this is what I say, then do cycles of fasting, mimicking, so that you counterbalance. You're not cutting on your muscle, you're not losing on your muscle, but you're counterbalancing the IGF state, so that at least you give your cells a rejuvenation chance. Instead of, if you're eating 6 meals a day and you're weightlifting, right? You're probably doing less autophagy than you need, because you're just pro growth all day, and your body is not correcting, and you're growing muscle out of tears rather than out of rejuvenation or regeneration. And you want to make sure that this person stays strong and build muscle, but at the same time live healthy long.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a tremendous amount of sense to me, Dr. Antoun. I am going to push back a little bit, though. I think that, a lot of what we've been talking about is thriving versus surviving, right? And so when we look at the World Health Organization or the RDA, I mean, I think RDA is maybe 0.7 or maybe now 0.8 grams per kilogram, and World Health Organization, I just looked it up, is 0.83 grams per kilogram.
Yeah.
We also know
per kilo.
Yeah. So we know that protein is not very efficient, or at least for our body to mobilize it. It's certainly less efficient than carbohydrates, right, in terms of quick mobilization of resources. What we also know is that when we're looking at in your latter years, right, we're talking 50, 60, almost every adult in that age group is dealing with some forms of sarcopenia, right, even younger than that. And Darsh and I, we're both physiatrists, and what we often see is medicine is very, very good in prolonging life, but not necessarily prolonging health, hence your whole passion about this whole conversation, really. And so when we see adults in their later years, they cannot afford to lose muscle, right? And so obviously that U-shaped curve that you guys are talking about, the more muscle you can hold on to as you get later in year, the less frail you're going to be, the less likely you're going to bounce back from injury and falls and all that kind of stuff. So, those like 0.83 per grams per kilogram recommendation, I think my understanding is essentially for survival. And when we're talking about keeping as much muscle or maximizing muscle protein synthesis so we can actually build muscle, which tends to be a metabolic sink later in our years to help with diabetes, all the things that you mentioned, why not try to maximize that, right? And so for me, that number would be probably closer to that 1 point, depending on how, again, depends on how active you are in that 1 point. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and what you're saying, makes sense. But again, we're all brainwashed that, you want to build muscle, you need more protein. Well, I would tell you, let the person at age 50 exercise with 0.8 to 1, and you'll see that he's going to keep his muscle and he's not going to be sarcopenic at age 50. So
yeah, absolutely.
And again, 50, 55, you're touching to that 60, 65. But what the difference is that I don't think you need much more protein. Hey, 1 gram maybe, but what I'm trying to say, you don't need that person to be 1.52 or 2.5 to gain muscle or to preserve their muscle. He needs to exercise with the healthy nutrition, with the healthy diet that, hey, getting close 50, 55, 60, yeah, maybe 1 put is what I said. After 65, you have to be a little bit higher.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know there's probably no single intervention that a person can take. I mean, obviously it depends on background and what they're doing. Then if you have a complete sedentary individual, and if Darsh and I talk about this, when there's a pillar of health that we look at, exercise, implementing that regimen in terms of both morbidity and mortality, there's no other thing that they can do. As much as we can talk about the different types of protocols here. So I certainly agree with you, and that's a passion of mine for sure. Yeah. You brought up the other points of course, I think when you get to that physiological upper end of and beyond physiological ranges of 2.53, and we brought up some of these bodybuilders who we should highlight that a lot of them have publicly declared that they're using, other substances, which allows their body to process all these differently than the average individual who is not using drugs of any sort to do that. And of course, that's going to completely change the physiology of how the body interprets. So that's also something to keep in the back of our minds.
Yeah, and also the source of the protein, right? So we talk about the sequence of amino acid, and this is what defines the difference between meat and plant-based source of protein. I don't know if you guys watched The Game Changer, and I think one of the smartest bodybuilders, definitely Arnold Schwarzenegger, who turned into, he learned all these things and is like thinking more about his longevity today, while not compromising his muscle mass. So I think, and this is always, this discussion we're having now always happens between longevity. Where is that borderline between longevity and strong muscle, right? And we all want a strong muscle, and I think this is the limit, is the 0.8, per kilo, because every pound is 2.2 something. So per kilo, all the way to 1, say 1.2, if you want to push it forward. Let's agree on something that you don't need 2 or 3 to stay strong. You probably need to exercise more on a 1 to 1.2 rather than get 2.3 and age faster for not a lot of more gains in the muscle. And then it depends on the person. If you want to look really strong at age 50, then yeah, you got to go a little bit more on the protein. If you just want to look lean and fit and want to decrease your risk of cancer at that age, and because your parents both died of cancer, so the answer is always it depends. This is what we're trying to say. If no one in my family died of cancer, and I want to still build muscle at age 55, then I agree with you. You got to lean a little bit more on the protein.
Absolutely. And anecdotally here speaking, I'm Jain, so I picked the right parents, and I'm sure David Sinclair is studying the Jains of India in terms of longevity, and so my one grandma lived to 109, and the other is 91. But being Jain, being vegetarian, very low protein diet. I mean, I even look at my parents now and I'm like, hey, let's at least get you to that 0.5, 0.6. And it's such a struggle for them. But how much of that is actually just genes playing a role? I mean, my 91-year-old grandma can probably walk a mile or two. And I think it also comes back to just that idea of exercising and being functional, right? Not necessarily just weightlifting, but throughout the day, walking instead of just sitting all day, increasing your NEAT. And so those things I'm starting to realize is also a huge factor here. So again, this is anecdotally speaking, but a low protein diet, at least from my end, from being Jane, doesn't seem to at least affect that much. But again, is that optimal is the question. I always think, what if they increase their protein a little bit? Would their function have gotten better? And I know something that Walter Longo talks about in the longevity diet is eating what your grandparents ate, right? Eating those types of foods. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, and it's mainly rematching, why we have a pancreas of size X, why we have, we're tailored with evolution, right? We're tailored with how we interacted with nature. And the more you deviate from this, the more you're going to see something going wrong, right? And so humanity lived around rivers. I know there's crazy theories where cavemen, there's no water nor food in a cave. We slept in a cave just to protect ourselves at night, but we lived around rivers, not around oceans. The ocean water, you cannot drink it. The water you can drink, which was essential to life, is rivers. And around rivers were the highest density of trees, of grass, of fruits, of vegetables, of legumes, of things you can eat. And this is why we, as humans, lived most of our existence on planet Earth with a plant-based diet. And fish was the only animal that couldn't fly or run, or it was easy to fish. So it was plant-based plus fish, and that's the pescatarian diet. And then with time, we evolved and we learned how to hunt, and we started involving meat. We started involving meat in our food. So somewhere between that pescatarian / flexitarian is probably what would rematch our body with the longevity aspect. Now, again, if you want to go a little bit more flexitarian and or Mediterranean, add a little bit more meat for muscle reasons, you can go there. But if you ask me, what is probably the most matched diet with longevity, pure longevity, I would say a flexitarian / pescatarian one, which is rematching our body with what our body has optimized to consume and live with.
Flexitarian, I love that. I'm going to be still in that, by the way, of course. I'll give the appropriate credit. Is that something you came up with, or?
No, I think it was cornered first at Harvard. Flexitarian meaning you're pescatarian, but you add a little bit of meat. Now, if you add more meat, then you're Mediterranean. So love you flex it. You're a little bit more flexible. You're a pescatarian, but flexible, which is what I am actually.
Love it. Yeah. So I think that just the discussion over the last hour, and hopefully people have gotten a sense of the nuance that it takes to communicate, these different types of diets and discussion. And I'll tell you what, I've been doing this for quite some time, although I'm probably in my infancy when it comes to medicine, but I think I did have a life before that. And so the aspect of nutrition and fasting, again, intermittent fasting really got big in the fitness realm a lot sooner than it did in the medical realm. And so this is something that I've had a pulse on for quite some time. But the same respect, I find this discussion of nutrition, and I think we could probably agree, it's the most polarizing and the most complex discussion to have at an individual level, but also when we're talking at public health, right? Just a new study comes out, the media will take a catchy message and put it up there, and then people will gravitate towards that. And so every week or 2 weeks, I'll get somebody sending me, what do you think about this? What are your thoughts about this? And to me, the answer is very much, well, it depends. It's a strategy. It could work. I don't know. And so you have spent a great deal of time, of course, doing the research, but also the public health messaging, studying at some prestigious institutions. How do you approach this? Having conversation with the masses, but also at an individual level, really communicating the nuance behind nutrition.
First and foremost is that nutrition is the only product we put in our body every day of our life since the day we're born to the day we die. And so for me, I left medicine for nutrition because I felt it must be a bigger medicine than medicine, or a bigger signal, right? It's going to impact our epigenetics, and it's going to impact every cell of our body. There's no pill I can take today that can impact literally everything as much as nutrition does. So first and foremost, it's very important to do nutritional education at early stage in life, and not what we currently do, which is eat healthy and lose weight. It's much more than that. It's literally medicine. It's literally going to define your longevity. The two biggest signals after all my career looking at longevity, two biggest signals of longevity is nutrition and social capital, or the love, the purposefulness in life, the meditation, the family, the values. All this is probably equal to nutrition, because a lot of the centenarians we study, they don't eat healthy. A lot of them, they smoked for till age 100. A lot of them ate animal fat, but most of them were happy. They were living in their village with their family. And that serenity, that happiness, that purposefulness is a key as well. So going back to nutrition, it's important to look at nutrition as one of the biggest determinants of how healthy and long we're going to live. It's very important to teach nutrition beyond, just lose weight or gain weight. It's very important to make nutrition clean, which is a better nutrition, whether it's from a gluten perspective, from a carb perspective, from a sourcing perspective, from a regenerative farming perspective. But it's very important to go beyond now just clean and healthy inputs to how can we use nutrition as medicine and nutrition as a tool for longevity. This is where we come as L-Nutra. The longevity through nutrition is what we call L-Nutra. And this is where we're saying, well, it's beyond just a better ingredient or a better sourcing, is how can we send specific nutritional signals to our muscle, to our brain, to our longevity, to our epigenetics, and guide nutrition to help us rematch our body with its potential and live a healthier, longer life. And on top of that, if you're sick, how can we use truly food as medicine? And once we uncover the power of fasting and the stress it puts on the body as a survival to fix itself, this is what allowed us to kind of lead that food as medicine phenomenon. So to answer your question, this is all the 5 angles we have to come back to society and teach nutrition literally from early stages of school. And if I'm a policymaker, I'll put much more money into randomized clinical trial. The problem with nutrition is that in medicine, you do FDA trials, there's clear labels, clear claims. In nutrition, every day somebody wants to sell you a book and an idea, and they come up and it's a disrespect. This is why we in medicine, also the allopathic medicine crowd, it's not like we're disregarding nutrition as medicine, but it's a mess, right? And when it's a mess, you stay away from it. So it's important to put more regulations around what you can say in nutrition and who says what. And not like every guy every day can, if he has 1 million followers and he consumed them on fitness, now he's going to jump on nutrition and give theories in nutrition and guide them towards something. All of you guys, you should eat meat today, and so how can we put more regulations and how can we fund more clinical trials, which is the NIH is doing that. I mean, we're one of the most funded company by the NIH or projects. We have over $20 million in our trials from the NIH. And we're not a pill or a biotech. We're just a nutrition. We're more in nutrition than the biotech industry. So how can we do more? How can we elevate the role of nutrition, put more regulations around what could be said, and put more money in randomized clinical trials to figure out the truth? Because like you said, there's no clear truth in here, about which level of proteins we need, to which person, if they're sick or not, if they're 40, if they're 20, if they're 70. And we got to figure out those. What I can tell you is everything I told you was based on clinical trials that we do and or trials that I've read. I don't give a lot of attention to theories coming up every day just for being theories. And I always follow common sense of rematching my body with my body was evolved to do. And I try to add more science to that rather than go with deviations and things can always work, especially with longevity. Deviations help you with short term. If you have diabetes, you have you have seizures, you do ketogenic diet. Yeah, you do. You want ketones to your brain if you have issues on the short term, and you want to drop carbs with the ketogenic diet if you're diabetic. But it's not a longevity diet. So you deviate, and same like pill destabilize the body with accentuating a receptor on statins or TOR, it's a destabilization for a special service. And this is where we should deviate from nutrition. But otherwise, for homeostatic longevity, you want to go back to your longevity potential, rematch your body with how it was tailored to deal with food.
Yeah, I think to your point about how messy nutritional science could be, I mean, I can really appreciate that. And it's messy for just scientists and physicians and really anybody in this space who've been trained to do that. So I really feel for the quote unquote lay population who aren't routinely involved or haven't gotten the exposure. You take that and compound it with the fact that, again, as you mentioned, there's very little education provided to the people who are at the forefront, who are the perceived experts, right? When patients go see their physician, even if it's for a well care visit or preventative care, and And there really isn't much to that conversation other than just eat healthier. I think about, sorry, this is a little tangent, but I think about a recent survey. A shout out to Precision Nutrition, which is a tremendous company, online nutritional company, one of the largest ones. And recently they put a survey out talking about, majority of the individuals, their struggle isn't about, what to eat. Most people know that. And you mentioned this at the outset. It's really about emotional eating or cravings and that kind of stuff. That burger that you said immediately when you have this hunger pang coming in, and behavior aspects, much of what you started with. And I guess the optimistic part about this whole situation is, you mentioning that because of these conversations, more attention is being paid to this, and therefore a lot of these NIH and bigger institutions are going to fund it, and that's where maybe we can iron out the data a little bit and make that messaging clearer. I also want to ask you, just because of the holistic approach that you've taken to this conversation, and I'd be remiss not to ask you about some of the other signals of longevity. We touched on exercise a little bit. We've talked a lot about nutrition. What are other things that when you think about, aside from the things that we discussed, healthy aging, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe even in the hundreds, things that people should be cognizant of, or levers that we can pull to promote that longevity aspect, vitality aspect, if you will?
Well, I always talk about the 5 pillars, nutrition being number 1, exercise number 2, stress number 3, sleep number 4, and then again, that social capital, that love, the happiness, the receiving, giving love, the family, the stability, the safety, and I always think it's nutrition and that 5th factor compete for number 1, because we've seen a lot of centenarians not eating healthy. We've seen a lot of people healthy at age 90, but they don't eat healthy, but they're happy. And I think that level of serenity, of purposefulness, of happiness, and you see that in the monks, you see that in religious people live, on average, actually longer than non-religious people. You see that serenity probably is calming all the hormones of the body and a lot of the de-stressing. And is actually the pillar maybe of all the other 4 pillars, meaning you eat healthier when you're happier, you sleep better, you stress less, and you have energy to exercise, right? So maybe that's actually a foundational aspect of the other 4 pillars as well. But these are the 5 pillars that I would recommend people focus on to live a healthy, long life.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Antoun, this has been tremendously educational for me, and I think I really want to thank you for coming on here and for educating us, but also really, again, using the nuance that we talked about to kind of communicate this clearly. I think that that's well needed, and I'm also excited about all the research that you guys are doing. Before we let you go, we want to know where people can find you. If they want to connect with you, what's the best way? How do they get in touch?
So I'm mostly active on LinkedIn, Joseph Antoun. I do have a presence on Insta and Facebook, but mainly LinkedIn. If you want to track us through our company and our mission, what we do, L-Nutra.com, L-Nutra, and Nutra.com. And if you want to try Prolon, the 5 days fasting mimicking diet, this is what I really recommend is give it a try. It's only 5 days, and you can go to prolonfast.com or prolonfmd.com, FMD for fasting mimicking diet, or follow us on social there. If you love fasting and you want to talk fasting, there's a Facebook group called Fastination. It's Fasting Nation. It's a Fastination. Over 30,000 people there talking about fasting, about the fasting mimicking diet, and a lot of proloners. So this is how you can.
And then Dr. Antoun, what is next for you? What is next for L-Nutra? Anything in the near future?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about what we're going to do in Q4. I did give you like a little bit of snippet on diabetes. So we're going to launch a program for patients with diabetes in Q4 of this year. And then hopefully in Q2 of next year, we're going to launch the first ever nutrition for cancer program. So if you're diabetic, what you should eat. If you have cancer next year, what you should eat. And after that, autoimmune disease, and then Alzheimer's. We are shocked how there are companies in nutrition with tens of billions of dollars of revenue that have not put randomized clinical trials behind food to tell people what they should eat if they have a certain health condition. And a group of experts recently came together and put a position paper. They call it disease remission and regression. And it's very important. It opened the door for a lot of credible companies like ours to come and talk about this. Because before, if you say I have a program, a nutrition program to reverse a disease, then you're talking medicine, then it's a drug label, then you cannot launch that program. And more recently, they started talking about the potential for companies like ours and programs like ours to talk remission and regression, meaning you're not saying I'm reversing disease, you're not saying I'm treating that disease, I'm saying that I'm going to help you regress from it, or you're going to need less, this is regression. Remission meaning you need less medicine, or you're fully out of medicine. So instead of saying I treat the disease, which is a drug claim, and all the nutrition companies were forbidden from going there, we're saying, okay, I'm going to help you need less medication or no medication. And that disease regression and remission is going to be a big title for us coming into launching a diabetes program and launching cancer nutrition.
Cool. Well, it looks like we're going to have to get you back on here once those results start coming out with everything on the horizon. So cool. Yeah. So Dr. Antoun, I just want to thank you as well. I mean, everything we talked about can be very complex, right? Especially for the audience, but I think you explained everything very beautifully in a very systematic fashion. And so can't thank you enough for everything you're doing, what you're bringing to the field of longevity, healthcare, science itself. So thank you. And then the last question I have for you that we ask everyone is, how do we put the health back in healthcare?
For me, it's this longevity medicine or longevity science that you put back in health and remove sick. I mean, sick. We need the sick part of healthcare. We need definitely the surgical and the medical and the pill industry, but they should be 20-30% of healthcare, and 70% of healthcare should be lifestyle healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Dr. Antoun, thank you.
And remember, the aging, the biological age should be the unit of measurement of healthcare. We don't have a unit of measurement of health. To me, it's biological age, because the older you get, the higher the chance you're going to die soon of one of the 4 biggest.
For sure. And hopefully in the near future, we have a systematic or a set point where we can actually use a biological clock. So that'd be awesome to see. Cool. Thanks, Dr. Antoun.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Antoun.
Thank you.
Well, guys, that was an awesome discussion, and I hope it was as informative and stimulating for you as it was for us. Now, if you want to check out more cool things that Dr. Joseph Antoun is doing, please be sure to check him out at L-Nutra, and you can find the links in the show notes. Now, before we sign off, please remember the important disclaimer that everything in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nor should it be construed as medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We highly recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician regarding any specific health-related issues. However, if you enjoy the show, please be sure to subscribe, review, and share with anyone who you think will gain value from this as well. Until next time, thank you for listening.